Very much. My name is Tim Eyman, and I asked if it would be okay to introduce our speaker, but self-serving that I am, while I'm up here. I have some political cartoons that are all at my expense. They're both the same, so flip through those at some point as you're looking through them. They're exactly the same, but and I do have a handout, so take a look at that. Jim Walsh is one of my favorite legislators. My favorite moment with Jim was that he was on the floor advocating against one of the Democrats' bills, and they turned off the mic, and Jim kept talking, and you couldn't tell the difference. A fantastic moment. They were so angry and frustrated that the man's voice carries that well. I don't think he'll need this. The other thing that I think is really impressive about Jim is he got an award last year that was really impressive. The state GOP has an award they call the Courage Award, and by and large it mostly just goes to the biggest donors. Jim was one of these people that earned it through hard work, drove over 70,000 miles in 1 year, helping every event throughout the state of Washington. It is mind-blowing how hard he works, not just for his district, but for everybody. I just think he's a courageous guy, and he is, I always say, he's my favorite legislator, my best legislator down there, but I must admit the bar is a little low right now. So he really is. He's a wonderful man. I love him a lot, and I just want to introduce Jim Walsh.
Well, thanks for turning out. It's getting interesting down in Olympia. I drove straight up from a committee hearing where I was sponsoring a bipartisan bill on foreclosure avoidance prevention, and found a little bit of space where we can actually get some across the aisle cooperation. So Tina Orwell, who is the Speaker Pro Tem, and I have done a couple of these bills, and we had one that had a hearing tonight. And I think it'll move through. They're small bills, they're not dramatic, but they're good. They're good for homeowners, they're good for property rights, and in the end, I think they're good for the government encouraging private parties to seek solutions to their differences before they get too damaging. We're in week 5 of what's supposed to be a 15-week session right now, and it started out in a sort of friendly, bipartisan way, but it's getting very partisan and very difficult very fast. The results of last November, of course, were disappointing. We had expected that conservatives, constitutionalists, would pick up a few seats in the legislature. As it turned out, we did not. And not only did we not pick up seats, we actually lost 1 seat in each of the chambers, the State House and the State Senate. So we are in deep minorities now in Olympia. We can talk for a little bit after I open things up here about some of the whys and what happened there. But where we are right now is it doesn't matter. We are where we are. The breakdown currently in the State House is 40 Republicans to 58 Democrats. They are within a hair's breadth of having a 60% supermajority, which would change some things, particularly fiscal things, budget things, and the issuance of state bonds. So we are hanging on by literally 1 vote in the legislature from keeping the other guys from being able to run through truly everything they want. Currently, we're dealing with bills in committees. The floor action hasn't really heated up yet. That'll start next week, thereabouts. So we're, as you know, if you remember your civics, in the legislative session, any legislation, any bill, Any budget item starts by going through committee, where it is poked and prodded and amended sometimes, and then voted out of committee. In Olympia, a bill then goes to the Rules Committee, which is kind of the final gatekeeper before a floor debate and vote. And then when the Rules Committee releases a bill or a fiscal item, it goes to the floor of the legislature for amendment and debate and finally a vote of the body. And then it crosses the rotunda down there under the dome in Olympia to the other chamber, where the whole process starts over again. And if the bill makes it through both chambers, of course, it then goes to the governor's desk, where it is either vetoed or signed into law. In our state, things are a little different than some other states, and then in D.C., in most cases in our state, if the governor doesn't sign the bill and doesn't veto it, it will become law passively without his signature. So that's the process where we are right now. With their bigger majorities, the majority caucuses, led by the Speaker of the House in Olympia, Lori Jenkins, representative out of the Tacoma area, are pushing policies that are troubling, mostly at the prompting of the governor and the state attorney general. Although the governor and the state attorney general cannot themselves file bills, they can do what's called an agency request bill. There's a method in Olympia whereby any agency, including the office of the governor and the office of the attorney general, can draft a bill, set it up, write it, formulate it, structure it, and then hand it to a pliable legislator who will actually file the bill. And then these bills are usually marked as agency request or governor request or attorney general request. Although if I were the governor, I wouldn't be marking the bill's governor request. But they are pushing, the governor and the state attorney general are pushing a lot of bad bills. You've probably read and heard, a number of them are gun control bills. I wouldn't even call them gun control bills, they are anti-gun rights bills. They have a group of them. The most significant of them are another pass at an old effort, the so-called assault weapon ban. And the other one is a new permit, in addition to, and more than a concealed pistol license, a new permit that individuals will have to acquire from the state in order to buy or sell any firearm. And then they have a couple of others that are designed to restrict gun rights too. The governor has said as well this session that his top priority is housing. We are, by all estimates, behind where we ought to be in terms of housing units in inventory in the state. But this is a problem largely caused by the governor and his friends. They have used the Growth Management Act and other state law to make permitting the building of any significance anywhere difficult and expensive and slow. And as a result, we aren't building single-family homes or apartment buildings or what they call middle housing, which is kind of duplexes and triplexes. We're not building any of them fast enough. But the governor is going to fix this by borrowing $4 billion and giving it to his friends. That's going to fix the housing crisis. What we need to do to fix the housing crisis, of course, is get rid of some of the red tape, is tighten up in time the permitting process for getting building permits in this state. And we can do that while still assuring that houses are built safely and up to all common sense code. But that's not the governor's approach. The governor's approach is to make it harder and more expensive to get a building permit, and then offering basically selective relief to politically connected cronies. And that isn't going to solve the housing crisis. In addition to the guns and the housing, of course, we're living with the hangover of a bunch of anti-cop legislation that was passed not very recently, but a couple of years ago, and has taken effect more recently. You've probably read or heard about those. The most significant of those anti-cop bills that's left in force is a bill, now law, that restricts law enforcement's ability to pursue criminals and criminal suspects. An easy fix there, but one that the Speaker, Jenkins out of Tacoma, and the Governor have resisted. We have the plan, we have the bills to fix that, to restore a reasonable amount of ability to chase criminals to law enforcement, but they are bogging them down in committee parliamentary maneuvers and not letting them through. We also have a problem with fentanyl in the state and other hard drugs. And that's driven largely by a state Supreme Court decision of several years ago called the Blake decision, State v. Blake, in which the state Supreme Court actually somewhat reasonably pointed out what it perceived as a flaw in the state's law prohibiting the possession of fentanyl and heroin and methamphetamine. And the state Supreme Court said, where in statute we had said that the possession of these things was a felony, the state Supreme Court said it was not sufficiently defined, possession, and that we had to fix the definition of possession to be more specific, and that we could do that essentially by inserting one word into state law, and that word was knowingly. That you had to knowingly possess fentanyl or heroin or methamphetamine, and that could still be a felony, the court said. Well, you'd think that would be easy. We would just make a bill inserting the word knowingly in the 7 or 8 points in the statute where you need to say that, and then we'd be okay. But we didn't do that because that was too easy. And what we did instead was we set up an incredibly intricate system of basically 3 warnings on a possession of fentanyl or heroin or methamphetamine before it even becomes a misdemeanor crime, effectively decriminalizing the possession of these items. So we have a bill that would undo all that and put knowingly in where the state Supreme Court said put knowingly in, and restore possession of these hard drugs to felony status. Same story. We can't get it out of committee. They jam it up with questions and delays in committee. We can't get it to the floor for a vote. And last, and probably worst, the tax situation in the state. Property taxes in the state are calculated on a budget-based system. So the state government and local governments and your local taxing districts, school districts for their local levies, but also the junior districts, library districts, sewer districts, all estimate what they need in the coming 2 or 3 year budget cycle. And then your property taxes are calculated to cover what the government needs, rather than how it's done in most states, which is some sort of formula based roughly on the market value of your property that calculates a taxable value, an assessment, and then that determines what the budgets for the state and the local governments are. So, but instead of doing it that way, we have a system in which the tail wags the dog. The governments say what they need, and then your assessment is based on that. So we need to fix that, but instead we've got the bills to fix it. We've got a way to turn it into a more rational formula based on market values. We even have a deal to try to replicate California's Proposition 13, which would lock in taxes at a property's last transaction, last sale. So we've got 2 or 3 different ways to fix property taxes, but we can't get any of them launched. Because again, the governor and the state attorney general and the speaker of the House in Olympia won't let them out of committees. And I put in the tax category the governor's precious green energy schemes, because they are not really energy proposals of any sort. They are tax schemes masquerading as green technology programs. We are just beginning to feel the effects of the governor's beloved centerpiece, jewel of his ambitions, which is the cap and trade scheme we have in place now in this state. You'll know it covered in the media more as the Climate Commitment Act. And it is the worst sort of cap and trade scheme, a penalty, a fee paid by energy producers, energy refiners, and in some cases energy distributors, that shows up as a pass-along fee, cost, in what you pay at the pump for gas or diesel fuel. If you use natural gas, your monthly natural gas bill. If you use propane, either in a camper or in a house, in your propane, the cost of propane, and the cost of all these energy sources, they go up because of the cap and trade fees. And the governor, well, he's not clever, but his advisors are clever in that they structured this cap and trade deal so that the fee, which is a tax, but they say it's not a tax, the fee, the tax for the cap and trade scheme is paid in such a way that it doesn't meet or have to meet the state constitutional requirements that sales taxes on gas or diesel or other types of energy have to go to maintain transportation infrastructure. We have a thing in the state constitution, the 18th Amendment to the state constitution, that says sales taxes on energy sources need to go to pay for roads and bridges. So when you fill your tank, pay the gas tax, those dollars are supposed to only go to transportation maintenance. By structuring the cap and trade scheme as a fee paid at the wholesale level, the state avoids that 18th Amendment restriction that applies to sales taxes on gas and diesel, and they can use the money for whatever they want. It doesn't have to go to roads and bridges. And so the cap and trade money goes into the general fund of the state rather than the transportation budget, where it is sloshed around and distributed to cronies and other connected people who are doing whatever they do. Utopian schemes for free housing, utopian schemes for free drugs, utopian schemes for culturally appropriate government services. There are too many consultants and contractors to the state of Washington living large on state contracts that don't deliver any real value to you, the taxpayer. They deliver primarily sanctimony. So there's a lot to clean up, and we are in a deep minority trying to clean it up. So we really have to be smart about picking our fights and finding places where we can do things and say things that will resonate with people so that they will understand how badly the state government is run down in Olympia. And so we're doing that. We're doing that where we can. We have found some good hooks in the news. Some of it's been around the guns, the gun rights, and the erosion of gun rights. That's particularly resonant with people because the crime rate is up around the state, and particularly in King County. Some on the left will tell you that's not true, that arrests are down. Well, arrests are down primarily because we've effectively decriminalized possession of hard drugs. But if you look at violent crimes are up, and the arrests are up for them. So it is reasonable that people are more interested in protecting themselves than they were a few years ago. And wouldn't you know that just at that point in time, the governor and the state attorney general want to make defending yourself with a firearm harder to do legally. We're screwing everything up in Olympia that we can. We are taxing the now legal cannabis at such a high rate. We're driving black market sales of cannabis and other legal or quasi-legal drugs. We are absolutely crushing housing development with not only Climate Commitment Act costs, which do have an echo effect on building supplies and the things you need to build a house or an apartment building. The governor is absolutely hard driven to take away people's property rights. He's trying, through various angles, to expand so-called riparian buffer zones, which are the unbuildable parts of private property, nominally to protect the salmon, but the proposals he's made have really nothing. There's no nexus with salmon or any salmon-bearing creeks or rivers. It's a taking. I'm not sure that the governor himself understands the effects of his own policies, but I think the state attorney general does. And they are pushing what you could only call a far left political ideology, which believes in centralized power. There's another part of their solution to the housing problem is they want to move zoning away from cities and counties and put it to the state level so that the state decides zoning policy for local jurisdictions. It's all about centralizing power. We saw this during the COVID outbreaks and the abuse of the state emergency powers. And because they didn't pay an immediate political price for those abuses, the governor and the state attorney general, now think they have a blank check to abuse executive authority as much as they can. What do we do? What do we do? People say to me all the time, why don't you impeach the governor? Why don't you recall the governor? Well, we've pursued all those angles, but really what we do is we have to motivate reasonable people to turn out and vote. And this is where I'll come back to where I started. The results of last November were disappointing. I will tell you something that other Republicans and other conservatives will not tell you, or they will tell you is wrong. The problem, among several, last November was that conservatives didn't turn out to vote in Washington. Whether they were discouraged, whether they were disheartened, whether they'd all moved to Idaho, conservatives didn't vote. The turnout numbers on the model voters who are right of center were terribly low. The turnout numbers for left of center voters were also lower than usual, but just a little bit. The turnout numbers for more conservative voters were atrociously low. 10% in some places, more, closer to 20% in other places, under the historical average of where they should have been voting. So, in my opinion, my conclusion from that is we aren't giving regular people enough reason to send their ballots back in. They don't see the point. They think their vote doesn't count. They think if their vote does count, conservatives are spineless, won't do anything, and they're discouraged. So the challenge for the next couple of years is to give reasonable people something to vote for, something they understand, something they believe in, that's worth sending the ballot back. And we also need to ballot harvest, which is something that is legal in this state. So don't tell me you saw 2,000 mules. That's fine. All the stuff they talk about in 2,000 mules is not illegal in the state of Washington. Ballot harvesting, that is the organized collecting of ballots, of mail-in ballots, and handing them in large bulk, is completely legal in the state of Washington. The other side ballot harvests very effectively. We have tended to think, well, we're kind of above that, it's kind of shady, we don't want to engage in that kind of thing. We can't afford to do that. We need to organize and ballot harvest by precinct and by church and by social organization, like the Eagles. We need to use social organizations as a network for organizing and collecting the ballots of normal working people who want a better life in this state. So that was a somewhat linear walk around what's going on in Olympia. I guess I'll take questions for a little bit. All right, Michelle, I guess I'll your hand first.
Can you tell us a little bit about HB 1333?
Sure. House Bill 1333 is Attorney General request legislation, so Ferguson wrote it. It is called, and we need to be careful about the weird wording here, a domestic violent extremism bill. Domestic violent extremism. Not domestic violence. I've had people writing me, I don't see anything in the bill about domestic violence. It's not about domestic violence, as we can eventually think of it. It's a new term. It's a newfangled phrase that they're trying to create. Domestic violent extremism. What this would do is set up a commission controlled primarily by the governor and to a certain extent the state attorney general that would define extremism and give also misinformation, and then give the state attorney general the ability to prosecute people for engaging in, essentially free speech, extremism, and dabbling in misinformation. It is not constitutional. In Article 1 of the state constitution, remember, in the state constitution, the Bill of Rights comes first, not last. In the federal constitution, Bill of Rights comes at the end. In the state constitution, Article 1 at the beginning is the Bill of Rights. And there are at least 3 sections of Article 1 in the state constitution that make House Bill 1333 unconstitutional. And those are sections 5, 7, and 11. Basically, the Article 5 is the free speech analog to, the First Amendment, and the federal. Section 7 is basically privacy, and 11 is one of my favorite. It describes the right to freedom of conscience. This is a concept that the nation's founders in the 18th century kind of grappled with. The idea is that freedom of conscience it's related to freedom of religion, but it's even bigger and broader than freedom of religion. Freedom of conscience is the idea that you are free to think thoughts and have beliefs, whether they're religious or not, in your own mind, in your own soul, and that the government has no right to intervene with what you believe. And frankly, if what you believe is hate, you're free to hate. Most of us would hope you would not. But the idea of freedom of conscience is you have the ability to think what you think, believe what you believe. And House Bill 1333 is directly antithetical to freedom of conscience. It tries to put into statute this idea that there are only certain acceptable thoughts to think. And that's not just unconstitutional, I mean, that's un-American. And it's shameful that this is being put forward.
What are the chances of making it through?
It's not a lock. There is growing animosity and opposition toward that bill. The chair of the committee that heard the bill is not a strong chair. And so that individual will yield to the speaker's influence and to the voices on the far left. So it'll probably get through committee, but I mean, frankly, I want it to come to the floor of the House because we will debate it aggressively if it gets to the floor. And I think the speaker knows that this is a fight that we want, and she may not want the fight. I'll come to you in a second.
Jim, there was a bill going around that would have taken authority from the local school boards and given it to the state. Can you tell us about where that is?
Well, there's not one bill that would do that. There are several. They do it in several ways. They do it with money. They do it with policy. Frankly, the standards so far in that arena, in that area of the law, is still the comprehensive sex ed bill, the law now, which until that comprehensive sex ed law was passed, OSPI, the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the elected school superintendent for the state, could make recommendations about curriculum to school districts, but could not dictate to school districts what curriculum they had to take. So, I mean, it's a thin distinction, but an important one. OSPI, until Comp Sex Ed, could recommend curriculum, could recommend textbooks, but couldn't tell a school district what to do. Couldn't take, the school district had what the law and constitution calls broad discretionary power, the broadest kind of jurisdictional power over the policy of what kids were learning in that district. So the Comp Sex Ed bill, the reason it was so objectionable wasn't because it was about sex. To my mind, it was objectionable because it was where the OSPI was now dictating to school districts that they had to adopt particular sex ed curriculum. And oh, sure, of course there's money in it, because there's money in course development and course materials and curriculum development. So it's money, but it's also, again, about control. I mean, this is what the left, anywhere, but here in Washington, wants. They want that concentrated, centralized control. So, but there are other ways that they're doing it too. As you may remember, during the COVID outbreaks, the current superintendent, state superintendent of schools, a fellow by the name of Reichtel, very awkwardly, ham-fistedly tried to say that he had the ability to withhold school districts basically operational allotment monies. And in a very mendacious way, in this letter he wrote saying he had the power, he conflated two different sections of state law, one referring to the governor's emergency powers and one referring to OSPI's much more limited powers, in a way that tried to create this impression that the superintendent had emergency powers like the governor, which he does not. He's continuing to try to find ways to essentially codify, put into law, this belief he has about a power that he doesn't have to withhold money from school districts. And then really kind of ridiculously to that desire for concentrated power, he also wants his position to be eliminated as an independently elected position and become an appointed position by the governor, which kind of makes no sense, but it's like bending knee to the governor. It's weird stuff. Who was next?
Yeah, Representative, thanks for coming in.
Sure.
Clearly, King County, if not the state, is in a state of election fraud. Maybe we call it integrity, lack of integrity. I don't know to explain that to people in this room. Why not have what few Republicans we have left in this state that are elected petition our Congress to demand protection from the citizens of the people of the state of Washington who are clearly in violation of our 14th constitutional amendment rights, vis-a-vis definition of citizen, the fact that the state collects no information on citizens return mail that has ballot in it on a timely basis, let alone establish that anybody in this room can chain to custody on a ballot. So we don't even know if the Republicans that you say did not show up, maybe they did show up, but the ballots aren't getting delivered, they are getting counted. So why not petition to our U.S. Congress? In fact, we're in a state of distress here in Washington State for this fraudulent ballot system.
Because I don't think that's the fastest way to fix the problem. I think the fastest way to fix the problem is accept the shady rules of engagement and win under the rules of engagement. And then fix the rules of engagement. I believe it's doable. I mean, if it weren't doable, I wouldn't be here. My district was a 70-year, they called it the Blue Wall district. Voted, it was also changing colors, yellow dog Democrat. It was, a Republican couldn't win. Republicans ran as Democrats because a Republican couldn't win. You can change the political culture of a place. But again, you have to give voters something they can recognize and believe in. And as I said to some of my colleagues, I mean, many conservatives and Republicans and constitutionalists in Washington are afraid, they're timid, they want to split differences and accommodate. And so we have this conversation all the time. Don't do that. Be bold, be strong, articulate a clear vision of how government should work. Well, we don't want people to hate us. But hate is actually a kind of trust. If someone hates you, that means they understand what you stand for and believe that you're serious about what you stand for. So, I've tried to explain to other conservatives that the left hating you is actually a healthy sign. Don't mind that. We're not aiming for the far left, campus radical, petty bourgeois. That's what the French call it. I love using that term because they hate it when you tell them they're petty bourgeois, but they are. Upper middle class, limousine liberal, whatever you want to call it. That's what we have too much of. And I mean, we all know why. The blessing of the tech industry is that it's generated great wealth for the state and for individuals, but it has given many of the individuals for whom it created great wealth this kind of arrested development philosophically and politically, where they don't understand the system that enriched them and have continued to have sort of a campus radical pose into their middle age and dotage that is destructive ultimately to the very economic system that made them rich, or rich-ish. So that's the barrier, that's the challenge. The shady election dealings, all right. I mean, but every place has that. We just have to make it that our movement is strong enough that it's not close enough to cheat. Because the cheat will only ever swing a small fraction of the total vote. And it's been, it can be effective. But I believe if we give voters something to believe in, and if we engage under the current rules of engagement, we can outperform the cheat.
Sir, I doorbell my precinct, solid single-family homes in South Bellevue. Okay, I do not believe, I'm yet to find 75% of the people behind those doors who vote liberal. Something's wrong. I've been doorbelling hard. I've run for office twice, Senate, House, doorbell deeply. No difference is made when I doorbell a precinct or not. Something is wrong.
We also know that that's like one of the least referring someone that you know, like saying vote for Tim Eyman to someone you know is infinitely more effective. Doorbell knocking is not really that effective. And I want to say it because I feel like it's not being said, but I feel like we massively underperformed last year, and I lay a lot of that at the feet of the state GOP. But I understand. I was here. I saw Gregoire go into office, so I know election fraud happens in the state. But trumpeting that point is absolute poison to the people that we need in order to win any elections in the state. It is utter poison. And I'm with you. We gotta stop talking about it because it's killing any of the hope of getting back the suburban voters that we lost. I just want to say.
So 2 more questions, everybody.
I mean, it operates at a very base level. It impresses swing voters as basically being a sore loser. And whether that's just or not, that's the political reality. So there's a recency bias when you say you've doorbelled. I've doorbelled tens of thousands of doors. But it still takes, even in my, in my district, in most districts, it takes about 70,000 votes, less in some, more in others, to get a legislative spot. Nobody doorbells 70,000 doors. So there is a bias in our impressions of what we see at the doorbell, at the doorstop, at the front door. Now, it's great to doorbell, because in the sign that doorbelling is working is when you doorbell a neighborhood and the people, someone you talk to tells you, oh, you doorbelled my cousin's house and they told me they met you when you were doorbelling. You can build some word of mouth through doorbelling, but don't believe that your doorbelling impressions are like cross-sectional, demographically significant impression. I'm afraid that in King County, the challenge is one of inevitability. The strongest quality in politics, is to build a sense of inevitability, that this person is going to win. And what we have in King County is 30 years of radicalism, maybe longer, that have broken the belief in swing voters that a conservative can win. It's the hardest thing. Analogies into team sports. Talk to anyone who's played basketball or football or baseball or soccer or any team sport. The hardest thing in sports isn't to go from being mediocre to a champion. That's relatively easy. The hardest thing in sports is to go from being a loser to being mediocre. And that's where we are in King County right now. We need to get from being a 30-year loser to a team that's 500. And if we can get to be a team that's 500, that's when you get another King County executive who isn't a nut. I mean, and it's doable. I mean, it's been done. We did it in history. But we have to get back to where we're a 500 team in order to win one occasion.
But it's not just the voters, it's our own party. There's self-fulfilling prophecy. They don't invest in King County, particularly the Eastside, and so we continue that cycle.
This is true. I mean, we did test some in some of the Eastside districts here in last year. It didn't go very well, but we did test some focused doorbelling efforts, some focused media, mail, paid media efforts. You raise another good point. Another thing that's been born of 30 years of losing statewide races is we have a consultant class in the state, political consultants, who have been born and raised losing elections. And they don't have a sense of what it takes to win, and what it feels like to win, or what it looks like to win. Now, one of the lessons of Tiffany Smiley's campaign was she didn't use any of the local political consultant class. She was recruited and largely supported out of Washington, D.C., and most of the talent in her campaign were former Republican National Committee employees. And so they were people out of the RNC, out of DC. So it was an interesting experiment, if nothing else. I was interested in it because it was kind of a rebuke of the local consultant class. And how was she going to do? If we brought in a bunch of national consultant gurus to run this campaign, would she win? And frankly, I think that's why a lot of people thought she was going to win. And then, come election day, not only did she not win, on a percentage basis, she underperformed Lauren Culp. That was shocking. So, And you can't blame the end of my story here is you can't blame the consultant class entirely, because we had a high-profile statewide campaign that went around the existing consultants and didn't do any better than the existing consultants are doing. So it's not that. I think I come back to core values and to the communication of core values as what will motivate people to vote.
Last question.
Speaking of Ms. Smiley, I got like 20 mail, I swear, like every week, I got a mail donation.
Solicitation.
I was keeping I had a stack of them on my desk. And I got the impression that it was nothing but a grift by the consulting class. Am I wrong?
Well, your impression is your own. I can't tell you your impression's wrong. No. I think the Smiley campaign thought they were going to win. I do. I mean, I was not intimate with that campaign, but I did do a number of events with her. And I watched her. I watched her work rallies. I watched her work rooms. I think she thought she was going to win. We did it. She and I did it. Jason Rants, you may have seen it. He does a kind of a Christmas special, but it happens like in late October, early November. It was right before the election. And Smiley and I we were both invited by Rants to go on. It's a video thing he does that they also replay on the radio later. And so we were both his guests there, and it's all a surprise. Rants doesn't tell anybody who's going to show up, and then they show up, and it's at a theater over in, and Twisted Up, Renton, that direction. And I talked to her, that was close to the election. It was the last time before the election I talked to her at any length, and I don't think she was faking it. I think she thought she was going to win, and lots of people thought she.
I said that she was being manipulated by her consultants.
I talked to the consultants that she was working with and the staff. I don't think so. They spent a lot of money.
Why did they waste all that money sending out all those mails?
I think Murray spent 21 million, she spent 15 million. They outspent her by 6 million. So.
Who needed the money?
I think the money went to, you can question how it was spent, but I don't think it was grifted. Look, consultants take a chunk out of every campaign. If you want to believe it was a grift, I'm sure her consultants took a chunk out. But one of the things that some of us talked with Smiley about in the early stages of her campaign was she was not talking about issues enough. In the early stages of her campaign, if you'll remember, the ads were all completely biographical. And we're like, look, you've got to talk about crime, you've got to talk about cost of living, you've got to talk about issues. And they did actually pivot. And then they caught a bunch of flack for the pivot because she did an ad in front of a closed Starbucks and the other side punched back on that. But so if it were a grift, and I've seen campaigns that are grifts don't respond to stuff like that. Her campaign did respond to that, and they changed up their messaging from 100% biography to issues. Unfortunately, they pivoted too late. She wasn't able. You want voters to identify the candidate with issues. You want the voter to think, that voting for this guy is going to make my neighborhood safer. There aren't going to be as many car thefts. Or, voting for that gal is going to, bring the next Amazon to Washington instead of running it off to Texas. And what we fail to do a lot is bind our candidates with policy points, with values. If I vote for this person, they're going to represent that issue the way I want them to. And that's tough. You've got to start early, and you've got to be really smart about what issues you talk about to bind yourself to certain issues with voters. All right? Well, thanks.
Yep.
Thanks for turning out. Just keep doing it. Keep turning out. Keep answering Derek's emails and phone calls and solicitations, but don't give up. Keep turning out. A thing of Herb Stein, the famous economist, said something that can't go on forever will not go on forever. And the current left swing in the state cannot go on forever. So I believe it will not go on forever. Oh, Kathy, we have to.
Thank you for your great work, Dick. Question and answers.
Yeah.
I really enjoy those. I get my house clean during that time while you're talking.
Well, you must have a very clean house, or I need to
No, I have.
make my Q&As longer.
You talk longer. So that's the first thing. I want to thank you for that. And secondly, I've always known that you were smart. But when I listened to your speech on the gun issue that you did in the committee, I was overwhelmingly impressed. So I just want you to know that the resources that you brought together to present actually was really top notch. So thank you for the research.
Thanks.
Well, Jim did go to Amherst, so he's not a dumb buddy, everybody. So,
The Q&As are interesting. The lawyer to the House, not to the caucus, but the counsel to the House, after I started doing them and people started watching and they caught on a bit, sent an email out to all the members saying that doing private Q&As on social media might be an ethics violation. And so I pushed back and I said, well, okay, how would it be an ethics violation? And his response was, well, I said it might be. I believe the purpose of the email was to chill and discourage other legislators from doing it. There's nothing about doing Q&As on topical matters that's a violation of any ethics standard. But you'll notice that I don't do them in my office. I do them outside usually, because they will say that using any part of my office, including shooting the video inside the office, would be using public resources to do private communication. So that's the reason, if you're wondering why we do them outside, is we do them out in the open space where anyone can go around the campus, so that there's no use of your tax dollars.
When and where?
Huh?
When and where?
Tuesday and Friday, usually midday, whenever time allows, and then I do them on the campus, different spots.
On what, radio station? Or
It's
Facebook.
Facebook. We also put them
Start
on
following
Twitter
them.
and other social media, but it's a podcast. Thanks.
well, again, Jim Walsh, everybody drove up from Olympia, so let's give a round of applause. Thank you very much, Jim, for all you do for us for Olympia.
So I asked to introduce Tim because I don't know if Tim remembers this or not, but I have a story of the first time I met Tim, and it's actually what made me kind of really fall in love in a very Republican way with Tim. And so when I first joined the Young Republicans, when I was first getting involved, they had a rally up in Snohomish County. I don't know, Tim, if you remember this, the Young Republican rally up in Snohomish County. And I'm sitting on the sidelines. I'm new. I don't know anybody. I don't know who Tim is. I don't know who Joshua Freed is. I barely don't even know who half the Young Republicans are. And I'm just sitting there soaking everything in. And I don't know, the speakers, we're having one speaker after another come on up. And if you guys have ever been to the Snohomish County Courthouse, the way the stage is set is they have kind of like these concrete bleachers that just go up this little knoll side. And then the stage is right in front of them. And so I see this guy walking up and down the bleachers, going from person to person. It looks like he's handing them something. I don't know what, and I'm looking at him. I don't know what he's handing them. And all of a sudden, he's coming up to these two ladies that are sitting down there, and he's coming from their blind side. And I realize they don't see him coming. And he comes up, and he's got his roll of stickers, and he does this. Ah! And the ladies just jumped. And I was like, and I knew, like, I like this guy. I don't know who he is. I didn't know he was a speaker. Then later I get told, oh, that's Tim Eyman. But ever since then, I'm like, I like this guy. This guy's a funny guy. So with that, I'm introducing Tim Eyman, our last speaker.
All right, cool. Thank you. Wow, that was kind of awesome. Let me see. Well, Well, my name is Tim Eyman, and I was born and raised in Yakima. Ended up going to Wazoo, getting a business degree. For about 10 years, I was in the private sector at a mail order business, and then I fell in love with my wife, and we got married. But in about 4 years later, I fell in love again, and I fell in love with the initiative process. Absolutely took over my life. I loved everything about it. I love the fact that it was about ideas and not personalities. I love the fact that it was about convincing voters to vote for it. It doesn't matter if they're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent. You don't care. You just want them to vote for your idea. And every time they would attack me, every time they would do a political cartoon, I would just think to myself, they're upset because I've got an idea that's on the ballot that the voters may like. And they're trying to discredit the idea by going after the person. And it never, ever worked. So for 25 years, I've been doing initiatives. I have a handout. If you don't have a handout, Joe here, put your hand up, because we're going to be looking at this. But the theme of my discussion tonight is the word persistence. Persistence. Persistence is the word in my mind when it comes to our faith in God, our success in business, our success in relationships, our success in the political arena. Persistence is the thing that makes the difference. And to illustrate this, I want to talk about just kind of the intro of the world of initiatives for me. So in 1997, I sponsored Initiative 200. Initiative 200, limited affirmative action in the state of Washington. Now, if you're ever going to do something for the first time, you want to start with something kind of low-key, something real kind of easy, tip your toe in the water, see what it's like. It was a gargantuan, overwhelming task. I was way over my head. But we busted our butts, and for months we worked on this thing, but eventually had to go to John Carlson on KVI and asked him, begged him, please take over this campaign because we will fail unless you take it over. And he took it over and he carried over the finish line, but my first experience with initiatives was that failure. But when he took over I-200, I said, I don't need to be involved with that campaign anymore. I'm going to go do something else. So the next year, we sponsored an initiative that was lowering car tabs. And we worked our butts off, and we didn't make it. And we failed. We didn't qualify. So then the next year, we did Initiative 695 in 1999, and that was our first $30 tabs initiative. And the voters voted for it. And a couple of months later, a judge said, we were confused. We were confused. And they struck it down. And so it was a failure, except the fact that a Democrat governor the same day, Governor Gary Locke, held a press conference that day and said, regardless of the court's ruling today, $30 license tabs are here to stay. And it was at that moment where I really fell in love with the initiative process, because it wasn't the idea of passing the law that made him do it. It was the fact that the voters had voted for this idea, and these elected officials felt pressure that if they didn't do this thing, the voters would just come back again, and maybe it'd be 20, maybe it'd be 10, maybe it'd be 0. So there was enormous pressure on them to do it, but it was another failure. And so the next year, I did an initiative that put a 2% limit on property tax increases. And the voters voted for it. And the court said, too much stuff in that initiative. You just did too many things in it. So the next year, did an initiative that limited property taxes even more than the year before. So when government sued the voters because they didn't like the outcome of the election, we tightened the belt even tighter with the next initiative and said, we're doing it on purpose. Because you sued us, because you didn't listen to us, we're going to tighten the belt even tighter. This was 2001. This is the year of 9/11. And at 9/11, when 9/11 attacked, our initiative, coincidentally, was called Initiative 747. And many a political cartoon was made at the time about how our initiative was like a jet flying into a building. And there's a political cartoon being passed around that says, uh-oh, it's Osama bin Eyman. And it was just, they threw a kitchen sink at this thing, and yet the voters overwhelmingly voted for it. And that initiative, 5 years later, the court said the voters had been misled into voting for it. Misled. No one had ever seen anything like it. A court ruling that said somehow the initiative sponsor had somehow tricked you into voting for an initiative that you otherwise wouldn't have wanted to vote for. So again, another failure. So the following year, we did an initiative lowering car tabs again down to $30 because they started creeping back up again. And this initiative overwhelmingly passed, and the court actually upheld it. But they said a portion of it, when it comes to sound transits tax, we're going to keep that in place. So failure after failure after failure after failure. Yet we kept coming back again and again. Flip that sheet over. On the back of this sheet, it shows a list of all those initiatives that were all failures. And every one of those initiatives, because we voted for them, because we passed them, and because the pressure of the vote got the legislature to pass them anyway, have cumulatively saved the taxpayers over $54.9 billion over the last 25 years. Winston Churchill famously said, success is moving from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. And that's what it feels like. I'm not going to go through the rest of the initiatives for a while, but every year doing one initiative is astronomically difficult. You have to come up with an idea. You have to get a bunch of people to vote for it. You have to get it qualified for the ballot. You have to get the voters to vote for it. You have to keep the courts off your back. You got to keep the legislature off your back. It is enormously challenging. And it's exactly the reason I love it even more. If it was easy, I wouldn't want to do it. I'd be bored to tears in Texas. I'd be bored to tears in Idaho. Everybody agreeing with me. What's the fun of that? The idea of doing these in my home state of Washington, the idea of doing conservative ideas and watching voters vote for them over and over again and watching a rigged system try and take them away kind of gets in people's craw. And it gets them pretty annoyed. And it really gets the people in power annoyed. And so my entire reason for being here is complete shamelessness, loss of pride. It's to beg for money. I'm here to beg for money for my legal defense fund because I am in the war of my life, the political death match of my life with the state attorney general. This has been going on for 11 years. 11 years of investigation, of litigation, of persecution, of not just going after me, but going after my wife, my kids, my sister-in-law, people that are close to me. I mean, that's what the mafia does. That's the level that we have reached when it comes to Bob Ferguson.
There's a C note.
Well, there you go. Well, they'll just pass that around and get the ball rolling. But anyway, so my goals by being in front of you here today is to show you, one, that I'm still going. I've been going for 25 years. I'm 57 years old. I will do initiatives in the state of Washington until the day I die. If for no other reason than spite. I am not going to let Bob Ferguson stop somebody from exercising basic First Amendment rights because he can convince a court that I'm really not a human being. I'm a human political action committee, and therefore I don't have human rights anymore. I am categorized as somehow a non-person now. It's bizarre. They had a $5.5 million fine, and the Court of Appeals said the lower court judge kind of screwed up because they never showed that Mr. Eyman had any ability to ever pay a fine of this amount. That is kind of a basic thing. The 8th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution says there's a limit on excessive fines. Yet the judge would not consider whether or not somebody who had declared bankruptcy 3 years earlier was somehow capable of coming up with $5.5 million. This has been an absolute war. Literally last August, they took my house. They took every dollar that was in my bank accounts. I was allowed to keep $1,500. I was told that I could keep my car, but only if it was worth less than $3,650. If it was worth more than that, then I would have to pay them more than that extra amount of money. This has literally cost me every dollar I've ever earned in my lifetime. And my reaction to that is to work even harder, to do everything I can to be a super duper activist. So the thing that I'm really proud of since this thing has been going on is we've qualified initiatives still. I've been working with groups outside the state of Washington in 7 states last year working on election integrity, and we were doing photo ID to vote, last 4 digits of their social to vote. These are the key swing states that will make a difference in the 24 election, and we're going to be targeting 10 states in the next election cycle. I supported strongly Jim Walsh's initiative to get rid of the capital gains income tax. I had no problem supporting somebody else's initiative. That's perfectly fine. I don't have to have my name on it in order for me to support it. I want our supporters doing everything they can to be able to support it as well. I would say that this is what I was born to do. It really is. Quick story. My father was adopted. I'm adopted. My 3 kids are adopted. I tracked down my birth parents when I was in my mid-20s, and it turns out they were both political science majors. So I can literally tell you that politics is in my blood. I was meant to be in the political arena. But fortunately, I was put up for adoption and was raised in Yakima, where the value system in Yakima is quite a bit different than my birth parents. And Yakima, very conservative area of the state. And my value system is pretty basic stuff. Government, just leave us alone. Just leave us alone. We've got our hands full trying to raise our families, trying to go to church, trying to take care of our kids. Why is it you're making it so much harder for us? Can't you make it a little bit easier? So you'll notice every initiative I've ever done, every one of them limited government's power in some way. Limit the government's power to be able to treat you differently based on what box you check on which university you get into, how much you pay in car tax, how much you limit, how much you pay in property taxes, making it tougher to raise taxes. Election integrity, just want to make sure that the person is the person. And if the person is the person and they're qualified to vote, then count the vote. But if they're not qualified to vote, it shouldn't count. These are basic things. It doesn't matter when it's voters, if you're a Democrat, a Republican, an independent. The ideas are what really drives the process. So even with Bob Ferguson coming after me over the last 11 years and a nonstop effort, and I'm thoroughly convinced of this, the man wants me to just die. And every day I wake up and I live a happy day is a miserable day for that man. I feel so good about it that all I have to do is have a good day, and I know that I've made the man miserable. So every day I wake up and I say, how can I make a difference? This morning I went down and I testified against a bill that was raising property taxes to pay for more affordable housing. So therefore we're going to make housing less affordable in order to make housing more affordable. It just made no sense whatsoever, but I went down there, fire and brimstone, and just said this is idiotic, it's absurd. It was what I did, and today I got to speak in front of you. And this was so much fun to me. I mean, this is what I was born to do. It was the reason I was put on this earth, was to be a political activist. I thoroughly enjoyed running for governor, but I lost. And it wasn't the advertising, it wasn't the positioning, it wasn't the consultants. The people just didn't like the dog food. It wasn't the advertising, they didn't like the dog food. That's fine with me. The voters made a choice. We don't want you to be an elected official. Whew. They probably did me a favor. because I was meant to be an activist, to continue to push ideas, to put ideas on the ballot, to let voters vote on them, and do it not just in the state of Washington, but to do it all across the nation. Different ideas, different concepts, things that will make our country and our state better. There's a moment where I had a thorough amount of satisfaction when I saw Bob Ferguson and how I'm living rent-free in his head. And it was really a priceless moment. He was being interviewed by a Spokane TV station. It was right after the ruling. And it's literally, Tim Eyman is not a person anymore. He's a political committee. And so therefore, he must monthly report how much he spends on toilet paper and food and all of that. And all income must be reported. And he owes $5.5 million. You must feel very satisfied that you finally got Eyman. And he was smart enough in his first answer to give the right answer, which was, Mr. Eyman wants to make this personal. For me, it's not personal. This is about the law. It's about doing things right. But he couldn't hold back. And the questioner asked a follow-up question. And he said, and he calls me fascist Fergie in all his fundraising letters. And I thought to myself, it was a total non sequitur. It had nothing to do with the follow-up question. It was just, it was so burrowed into his head. He wanted the world to know that Eyman is so petty that he would call me a fascist and to connect it with Fergie. Fascism, the very concept of it, is to squelch and silence opposition. The man sees himself as being governor someday. And the last thing he wants is Eyman initiatives to have to deal with, because he saw how Gregoire had to deal with Eyman initiatives. He saw how Gary Locke had to deal with Eyman initiatives. He wants to take out a political adversary before he ever becomes governor. So what the whole thing is all about is to make sure that he doesn't have to worry about Eyman initiatives if and when he becomes governor. But what really drives me and keeps me going every single day is the ridiculous number of really nice people that have helped me survive these 11 years. The people in this room have helped me be able to survive this thing. I would never be here. If I was a regular person, I would have been taken out 6 or 7 years ago. There was no way I was going to survive this without a whole lot of people being willing to help. Sue back there was very generous, and there was just so many people that have helped me be able to get to where I am today, and I feel I owe it to all of you to keep going, to keep fighting, and it is a particular joy that I have that the thing that I love to do is what the most powerful elected official we have in the state, the Attorney General, says, you can't do that anymore. And I do it anyway. And every day that I do it anyway, with the support of an incredible number of people, is just so satisfying to me. I have a smile on my face every single day, even though I'm crying right now, because I'm doing what I love to do. I absolutely love the initiative process. I love the political process. It's dirty, it's a snake pit, and I love it. I just love every bit of it. I love how ruthless it is, and I can understand his idea of taking out me. But when he went after my wife and my kids and people that are close to me, I couldn't even conceive of a world where a mind can go in that direction. So I don't like to throw around the word evil, but I can't think of another word that can describe somebody that would go after somebody's family. So what was my goal here tonight? My goal here was to get you to hate Bob Ferguson just a little bit more. Now, hopefully goal achieved there. Persistence. I hope I've illustrated my level of persistence. Once they took the house, once they took all the money, he figured there's just no way he can keep going. And he can't stop me from doing what I love to do, even though I'm not allowed to earn money doing it. I can continue to be a political activist. He cannot stop me from doing that. He can cut off the money supply. So that's why this court case is so incredibly important. Because if he gets away with it with me, what a legal precedent that sets. The next person is going to be Glenn Morgan. The next person is going to be somebody else. The next person is going to be somebody else. They're going to be able to say, we did it to Eyman, we can do it to anybody. So as much as this is about me, it's about everybody. And so I beg of you, I'm the first person in Washington State history and the United States history to stop being a human being and to be declared a human political committee. It's never happened before. My attorney, Richard Sanders, said there's no legal precedent for this. And the Attorney General responded, well, there's no legal precedent, said you can't. So they ended up going forward with this case, and they got a judge to rubber stamp everything. The Court of Appeals recently ruled that they need to remand the dollar amount because at no point did the judge ever ask, is there any proof that Mr. Eyman can ever come up with $5.5 million? Answer was no. He never even asked the question, was never even allowed to bring that kind of evidence into the case. So this case is on appeal. It's going to go on for a long time. It's already gone on for 11 years. And I'm convinced it's just a ball and chain I'm going to have around my ankle for a really long time. So I just have to be stronger and be able to learn to run with a ball and chain around my ankle. And the only reason I'm able to do that is because nice people like you are willing to fill buckets in order to be able to help me pay my attorney to be able to appeal this case. I am so incredibly grateful to Attorney Richard Sanders for taking this case. There are so many lawyers who told me I will not face off against the Attorney General. I'm just too intimidated. It's a bad idea. Sanders is 81 years old and full of piss and vinegar, and he is fighting for me, and he's fighting for all of us. And so I beg of you, before you get out of here, take one of these sheets home, and it has the address at the bottom where you mail donation checks. Put money in the bucket. Make room for this. I'm not telling you give up on candidates and stop giving to Tiffany Smiley and stop giving to those guys over there. Do that. But also help me survive this political death match that I'm in the midst of, because I really like to live. And every day that you help me makes it more likely that I can continue. So anyway, with that, I'll take a question, and then we'll let you get out of here. Yeah.
I don't understand why you can't sue, what do you call it, Bully Bob?
Bully Bob.
Whatsoever it is. For damages to slander. It seems to me it's there.
He got a judge to rubber stamp what he asked for. We thought it was nuts. Let's ask for $5.5 million. Seemed kind of high to me. You know, it didn't seem like that would be within the realm of excessive. Judge rubber stamped it. Eyman's not a human being anymore. He's a political committee. He has to report monthly how he spends his personal money. This is crazy. Judge rubber stamped it. So the fact that the Court of Appeals has already said there are parts of the ruling that were wrong and that they're remanding the thing on the dollar amount is encouraging. But these are all scrimmages. It will eventually go to the state Supreme Court. It will eventually get into the federal courts. I'm going to have to fight this fight for a really long time. I'm going to be an activist every single day while this is going on. While Richard does his thing, which is defending me, I'm out here trying to do everything I can to give you value in exchange for the money that you're providing. And so I'm doing, testifying on bills, I'm promoting initiatives, I'm working out of state, I'm doing everything I can to show you that I am an activist born and bred, and I always will be, whether I make money or not, whether I have a house or not, whether I have money in the bank or not. But I really want to win this case, not just for me, but for the next guy. Because I know that if he gets away with it with me, somebody else is going to be next. And I want him to break his pick on me and make sure that this never happens to anyone ever again. So anyway, thank you very much.